Today I'm going to show you how to use a two-part spray foam insulation package. There's a lot of different manufacturers of these packages, so just depend kind of what's available in your area. Even though I'm going to show you how to use this particular one, make sure you for sure read all the safety instructions and the user manual in whatever package you get, just to be sure that in case there's any differences from manufacturer to manufacturer. So the one we have today is what they call a 200 kit. So what they're saying is that the yield on it will be about 200 square feet worth of foam at 1 inch thick. So we're going to be spraying close to 2 inches thick here, so we'll be hopefully getting around 100 square feet out of these two cans at 2 inches thick. So once I open up the box, some of the first things you find is you're going to find the instruction manual as well as the safety equipment that's needed and all little tips and that sort of thing. So make sure you read that over well. Most of these guys have 1-800 numbers and websites as well, so if you have other questions you can get a hold of somebody to ask. You should find an assortment of some different spray nozzles. These guys send two different types, and they've sent about I don't know, 4 or 5 of each one, it looks like. So this particular nozzle here is just for spraying gaps and cracks sort of thing. It's going to send out a stream, so that would be that one here. This one here is a fan tip. It's got a bit of a V-notch cut in the end, so this one's going to spray out about I don't know, it just depends on the kit you're using, but probably 8-inch or so fan width of pattern, which is good for filling wall cavities like what we're going to do here. So you'll have a bit of a selection of the tips in there. This kit comes with two containers, two steel cylinders. This particular one already has the hoses and the gun already hooked to it. It does have a bit of a carrying handle here as well. Some of the bigger kits, they're going to have tanks, two tanks obviously because it's two components, but the tanks are much larger, so they come boxed separately just because they're too heavy to carry as one unit. So in here, like I said, this one, the gun and the hoses are already attached to the tanks. Some of them it will come with a wrench, and you may have to attach your own hoses and gun. A couple things to go over, I guess, since I've got the gun out. Putting on the tips, the gun has a bit of a safety trigger here, this one. So the yellow button down here has to be compressed or pressed before you can actually squeeze the trigger. The tanks are still turned off, by the way, so you don't want to turn them on until you're actually ready to spray. So this gun has a safety on it. To attach a nozzle, just get it orientated right. There's usually some marks in the end of the gun that correspond to the way the nozzle looks, and just push it in there. On this one, this little lever here, you should just hear it click in like that, and just look to make sure that the little lever hooked down on the lock knob on the top of the nozzle. So putting the nozzle on just like that, taking it off, squeeze this button, pull it off. When you're spraying, if you stop for more than about 30 seconds, you're probably going to find that you'll have to change your nozzle. So it's a good idea, get yourself all set up, get things out of the way so that once you start spraying, you can just kind of keep going with it and you aren't losing a bunch of time. Otherwise, you're going to have to change your nozzles. What happens is the two components each come in their own hose, and once they hit the nozzle, there's a kind of a spirally setup inside of the nozzle here that actually starts to mix the two foams, because until the two products mix together, they don't actually have the chemical reaction which causes them to expand and cure. So if you stop for too long, it starts to set up in here and it clogs and it's not going to work properly. So that's why they send you multiple ones. So if you stop, pop your tip off, put a new one on, and away you go again. They also, in this bag, sent some petroleum jelly. So what they like you to do is smear some of the jelly right inside of the gun here, and that just helps to allow your tips not to seal up right at the end of the gun. So you can just throw your away, put a new one on, and everything should be fine. So we've got the jelly. Optimally, your tanks need to be around usually about 24 degrees Celsius, so that'd be what, I don't know, about 79, 78 degrees Fahrenheit, to get the most yield out of them and to make everything work properly. So keep them somewhere stored warm. You can spray onto a cooler surface, but you don't want something that's frosty and wet. So like here, we're doing this in February, and it's a below grade, so the wall is cool, but it's actually still about 2 degrees Celsius, so, and there's no frost present. So that's your tanks. Once we're ready to go, we're going to open both valves on the tanks completely. You're going to see the product start to come down the line. Once it fills up the lines, before that, sorry, you should shake the tanks really well too. I think it's usually around 30-40 seconds you need to agitate the tanks. That will just get things mixed together. Open your valves, let it bleed into the lines, do your petroleum jelly, get your tip ready, and then you're pretty much close to being ready to spray. And obviously before that, put on all your protective equipment. Protective equipment, these guys recommend, if you don't have real good ventilation, that you should be wearing a respirator similar to this, and it's fitted with cartridges that are for organic vapor as well as particle filtration. So they're kind of a two-part canister. One does the organic part of the chemicals, and the other just does the any solids that might be in the air. So it's important to have that if you don't have the proper ventilation. We did a video with a similar product there a while ago, and we had a lot of people freaking out because we weren't wearing a mask. We did talk in the video how we had lots of ventilation and everything, but we still had people kind of freaking out. So we've actually going to redo this video today, and we don't have the ventilation here quite as good. We just were able to open a couple windows. So we're going to use the mask for sure. Also some rubber gloves to protect your hands. You already see that I have the painter's suit on, or the body suit on, to protect my clothing. I'm wearing a hat. I'll have safety glasses on. So it's just to protect yourself from any spray back that you might get. It doesn't happen very often, but you never know. You could get some bounce back onto you. So, and it doesn't come off that easily. You definitely don't want it in your eyes or your mouth or anything like that. So, so that's the protective part. I think I've shaken the tanks pretty good. We'll give them another little shake before we go. Just before I actually use a nozzle, and once I've got the tanks open, I'm going to shoot the gun into a garbage can or a box, or in our case we're going to use a garbage can, just to make sure I'm getting two fairly even streams coming out. Then I'll get my tip on and start spraying. So when you're spraying, it's much like, kind of in a way like spraying paint, if you've ever had to do that. We're going to come up to the wall. We want to be about 6 or 8 inches away from the wall, and we're just going to, regulate our speed by hand to put on the amount that we want to see get on. Now remember, it's going to expand some, so you don't want to fill the cavity right up right away, or once it expands, you're just going to be having to cut it all off because it's sticking out too much. So it's simply squeeze the trigger, regulate your speed, let go of the trigger, squeeze, and come down again. Okay, so you just keep doing that. We're going to do some of these spaces here. In preparation, what we've done, any electrical boxes, you'll want to tape them up or seal them up, because once the foam gets in and around them, it'll actually expand into the open holes and cavities of the box and actually end up inside, so you want to prevent that. So we've just wrapped this one in some plastic. The wiring is fine to be embedded in the spray foam. That isn't a problem. We've just basically brushed the wall off, made sure it wasn't covered in any cobwebs and dust and that. If the wall is damp or frosty or anything, you want to make sure you warm it up and dry it off before you spray this on. It won't bond to the concrete as well. You will get some probably overspray onto some of your framing materials. Here we've just got 2x2s, but that will clean off with a scraper fairly easily once it's cured. Anything that's around the area that you don't want to get foam on, just poly it up or tape it off or whatever, just to be sure you aren't getting some overspray on anything that you didn't want to cover. So we're going to spray some right on this concrete wall. I'm going to go up and do a couple cavities in that wood wall too. It's really just the same thing, but just thought I'd show it since we can. I think that's pretty much covering everything that I had to talk about. Again, remember, just keep your foam canisters at a good temperature. These ones actually have a little temperature gauge on them, so that's kind of handy to know where you're at, but just keep them inside so they're warmed up and good to go. You don't want to directly, blast a furnace on them or wrap them in an electrical heat blanket or something like that. Nothing that extreme, but just make sure they're warmed up well. Okay, so I'm going to put on my protective equipment. You may not be able to hear me as well with the mask on, so that's why I was trying to cover everything here before I get all suited up. But I may do a bit of talking with the mask on, but it may not be that clear. So I'm just going to break away here for a minute, get my personal protective equipment on, and then we'll come back and show you how to spray. Okay, so we've let things sit here for a little bit and let the fumes get out so we can take the mask off and finish up. You can see it's expanded out nicely, it's nice and firm. If you get a wrong mixture, sometimes you'll get a clogged line or something. So if you get too much of one of the chemicals, and I can't remember which way it is, you'll actually get soft, mushy foam. And if it goes the other way, where the other chemical is too much, the foam is really brittle and it just doesn't stand up. If you touch it, it actually crumbles away right away. Where this is, this is good. This is nice and firm. That's exactly what we want. So now the next step that we're kind of at, and it's not, actually something I didn't mention, was in most areas, if you spray up to 2 inches, you more than likely will not have to put the poly vapor barrier on the inside, so just check with your local codes on that. The one thing to consider when doing that, and you notice that I put on 2 to 3 different coats, like passes, so that those first couple get a chance to actually cure before you cover them up and form that skin over it, which gives you that airlock or that air stoppage. Because what's going to happen now, you can see where some of this foam is expanded past the actual framing, so I'm going to go back, and trim it back flush. So now if I had done that all in one pass, now that I cut that probably compromises the vapor barrier qualities of it, where because I've got those couple passes in behind that I'm not going to be cutting into, in my opinion, that's still pretty good. So in this case, we're actually only, in a lot of this, we're a little less than 1.25 inches or 1.5 inches thick. So we're going to need, and for my area, we're going to need another vapor barrier anyways. But something to consider. So if you're spraying into a 2x4 wall where you've got the ability to spray it 2 or 2.5 inches thick, go ahead and do it. Check with your local building authority, because you may not have to put a vapor barrier over it after. Okay, let's move on. So we've got it all sprayed. You can see I'm just taking a utility knife and just shaving this down flush with the studs and just clean it all up. Peel it off. So you just go around and do all that, because otherwise if it's sticking out and you go to drywall over top of that, it's going to give you some issues with pop screws and that sort of thing. Okay, so just keep going around. Another thing you can use is the old handy red bar. Scrape things down, get right underneath it, scrape it off like that. Once the foam is to its cured point, this is not hazardous anymore. You can throw this right in the garbage. Don't eat it. Throw it in the garbage, but you don't need the mask. I don't really even need the gloves on anymore, but just go around, get things cleaned up so that it's all good for when you want to put the finishing touches over top of it. What else? Did I forget anything? I think that should cover it. So now you've seen how to do it. This may not be the most economical way if you're going to do a whole basement. These kits aren't real cheap. It might be cheaper to actually have a pro come in and give you a price to do the whole thing. If you're in a remote area, though, this might be the only option you have. If you're going to do a couple rooms or a little bit of space, then also again it might still be very economical to do